Welcome everybody. We're going to get started here in a couple of minutes. We're just allowing everybody that's logged in to kind of virtually walk into the classroom here. So we'll get started in just a minute. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to today's presentation. Going to give everybody just a minute here. Okay, and we have hit the noon Eastern mark, so we are going to get started today on the presentation right on time because we've got some really fantastic content for you. My name is Jess Zelmer. I am a member of the PAC board, and please let me welcome you to this fantastic seminar that we're going to have today featuring Dr. Ni Kang, who comes to us all the way from Singapore. She is also on the board of PAC among her other many talents. So thank you everyone for joining us. For those of you whose first seminar this is, online seminar this is with us, we appreciate you attending. We also appreciate if this is a repeated seminar for you. If you have any questions, you can put them in the questions box down below. We will answer questions at the end. In addition, this is counting as a CEU. If you are PAC certified, we will provide that code near the end of the at the end of the presentation. So welcome to you. As we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody of what PAC is. If you're new to our organization, PAC has a mission here that I've put up, and the mission of PAC is to bring independent testing and certification to the pet services industry. So if you haven't been around PAC much or seen us at the recent conferences, that is our mission, is to bring independent testing and certification to the pet care services industry. And it really is, why did we design this test? It's because we want to elevate our industry and take it to the next level and provide the best care for pets here in the U.S. and really across the world. It's an international group as well. If you're interested in taking the PAC exam, there are 3 different levels. There's a provider level for folks that spend most of their time with the animals, or maybe people that are newer to the industry. There's a manager level, and then there's also an owner-operator level that is available for those of you that own a pet care center, or maybe you are the primary operator of that pet care center. The requirements for each of these tests are on our website, so if you're curious as to which level might be most appropriate for you to concentrate on, you can visit our website, paccert.org. Why isn't PAC important? Why is PAC important to your business? And this is a question that we get asked quite frequently. The boarding space, as you all know, is getting pretty crowded. It seems like these days everybody from big box to your next door neighbor has a pet sitting business or a pet care business. And PAC is really a way for you to differentiate your pet care business from really everywhere else. It shows your dedication to a higher level of safety in education as well. Anytime you can increase the education level and the knowledge level of the people on your team, you will have a safer pet care center as well. So developing your team will make your pet care center a safer place for you to be, and it will give you the ability to recruit higher quality employees by providing or requiring this level of education. Why is it important to your team? It really allows the high performers on your team to stand out from the crowd. It allows them to grow their skills, and it shows them that pet care can really be a career. This doesn't have to be a summer job for people. Pet care is a real business, and this will show them that career path that is so important to business owners in terms of keeping and retaining high quality employees. And you can also use it as an incentive. If you see somebody that's performing very well, it's a great way to engage them more in your business by investing in their careers as well. And perhaps most importantly, why is PAC important to pet parents? I think this is the population that really needs PAC the most. It's so hard for pet parents to know the right questions to ask, to know what to look for in a safe pet care business. And PAC's mission is to bring that knowledge to pet parents and also allow pet care centers that invest in education, that invest in the quality of their care, to stand out from everybody else. So we hope that not only you enjoy this seminar today that we're going to begin here right in a minute, but that also you'll take a minute, visit our website, learn a little bit more about PAC and what it can bring to you, whether you're a business owner or if you're someone that works in the pet care industry. Check it out and see how PAC can help you to advance your business or advance your career. So now we are on to the main event. I want to welcome all of you again for the presentation. This presentation that Dr. King is giving will be recorded as well. So if you don't want to furiously take notes today, we will be sending you a recording, and and the recording will also go out to those of you that weren't able to make it today. So Nee, I am going to pass the presentation over to you.
Sure.
Okay. Very good. I'm seeing your presentation now. If you just want to open that up, and I hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So we're ready to go.
We are ready to go.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks, Jess, for that little introduction. And as part of the PAC board, I look forward to welcoming more of you to take our certification, and we see you in our little community. Right, on to the topic for today, and it's all about separation anxiety and how we can help pet parents and dogs with this condition. My name is Nee. I have a PhD in zoology, specializing in behavior. I'm one of about 3,000 certified professional dog trainers worldwide, one of 76 certified separation anxiety trainers, the only one in Singapore. I'm also the only certified canine fitness trainer and also PAC certified individual. Why are we here today? And it's all about education. And Jess, I'm having a little bit of trouble advancing the slides. Okay, we are there. And it's all about education, to find out what we know or don't know about separation anxiety. And that's just so that we can explore appropriate treatment or management choices, whether it's for your own dog, your friend's dogs, or your client's dogs. And it takes a village to look after a dog with separation anxiety. And the main conversation that we're going to have today is how, as pet care professionals, we can be part of that village. So what is this village that the separation anxiety dog needs? At the center of it all is the pet parent, because the pet parent is the one who has to cope with that condition day after day. and they need a lot of support, both emotional as well as physical support from family, friends, their friendly neighbors, trainers who will work with them to craft the training program. And for many of the dogs with SA, they need the help of their vets and perhaps even a veterinary behaviorist. So where does that leave the rest of us? Those who are operating daycares, boarding, who are pet sitters or dog walkers? Well, you are also a very, very important part of the SA Dogs Village. And today, I hope that we can start a conversation which will continue after the webinar to look at business models, creative ways of thinking out of the box to help the SA dog and its parent. First, some technical details. Now, there's a whole bunch of behavior indicators of anxiety that is sometimes labeled under the umbrella of separation anxiety, but not all of them are, so we need to know a little bit about the differences. Clinical separation anxiety, that's a form of a separation anxiety where the dog is really bonded to just one or maybe two people at the most. And when those people, that person or people, are not around, the dog breaks down and panics. So that's why I say for clinical separation anxiety, you're the only one. You're the only one who will do for me. But by and large, when we talk about separation anxiety in general, we are looking at a condition that's called isolation distress, where, yes, the dog panics when it's home alone, when there's no one around, but as long as there's a warm human body who is present with the dog can cope. So that's the isolation distress is what we will be referring to today in our webinar when we talk about separation anxiety. And then there's confinement distress, where for one reason or another, people may keep their pet in a confined area, a crate, a pen, a kennel, or a room. And that could be because perhaps potty training isn't completely done. Perhaps the dog is a young dog and is chewing up things. So people feel that it adds an element of damage control, which is true. But for dogs, if they do have separation anxiety, they may experience what you call confinement distress as well, where if we actually take them out of that confinement area, they do very much better with the treatment. So this means that before we can decide if a dog is actually having separation anxiety, we need to rule out certain things. First, medical conditions. If a dog is aging, is there cognitive dysfunction in the background? How about seizures, other neurological disorders? Confinement distress, we've already looked at it, where if confinement training is not done appropriately, such that the dog actually enjoys being in the confined area, you may get behaviors that display as anxiety. And how about arousal or territorial barking? So if a dog that's barking all day long, could it be that instead of separation anxiety? And how about mental and physical stimulation? And we are talking not just about insufficient stimulation, but also inappropriate stimulation, which may trigger more arousal, more stress. Right? So that's another thing that we need to rule out. And then, of course, incomplete potty training. And dogs who are noise sensitive, they will also display signs of anxiety. So some of these behaviors look very similar to separation anxiety, but they may not be. To understand what separation anxiety is, we need to know what it isn't. Your dog is not being disobedient, it's not being spiteful, nor seeking attention just to pay you back for leaving it alone. And unfortunately, it's not something that the dog can get over. I mean, you may think, well, day after day I leave, but I come back. You should know I'm coming back. The dog doesn't know, so it cannot get over it on its own. And it's also not because of the lack of pack leadership or because of things you did, like, for example, letting the dog go through the door before you or sleeping on the bed. As long as there are appropriate boundaries and you have put in place basic family dog manners. Okay, I'm going to look at this little video clip that's taken from YouTube. As far as I know, this is not one of our clients, it's not mine, and neither do I think it's one of my colleagues. But this is just to show you what are some of the behaviors that you may see in a dog with separation anxiety. So it looks quite all right at first. The dog is lying down. Take note of what's on the door there. There's a cardboard. Then a while later, mayhem. Now, when you look at behaviors like that, we do have to troubleshoot. Is it just the dog is having fun? The parents are out and is having great fun tearing things apart, or is it really separation anxiety? So what then is separation anxiety? If it is indeed SA, it is a behavior disorder, very much like a lot of phobias that we see in people. Fear of water, fear of heights, fear of spiders, cockroaches, fear of going out into the open. And while these contributing factors are not the direct causes of separation anxiety may be associated with situations like noise and other phobias, a traumatic event, a sudden change like a new baby in the home, relocation, air shipping, puppies who are shipped in from overseas from the breeder to the pet parent. It could be age-related. And as with a lot of behavioral challenges, there's always nature and nurture at play here. So genetic predisposition is also involved. And for some dogs, multiple rehoming can also trigger the onset of separation anxiety. So when a dog shows separation anxiety, it is in a state of panic. The dog cannot control its behavior. And the American Veterinary Medical Association has estimated that about 15% of the dog population in the US, and that's a whopping 11 million dogs, and that's not even counting dogs outside of the US, could be afflicted with separation anxiety. So I'm going to take you back to that little bit about the conversation that I hope we are going to have later, is that there are a lot of dogs out there that need our help. Some essential facts about separation anxiety, and these graphics are used courtesy of Marlena Di Martini, who has kindly given me permission to use them in this webinar. We've already looked at this. Separation anxiety is a true panic disorder. The dog cannot get over it on its own. It needs our help, and very often just the behavioral piece of the treatment plan may not be enough. However, if we can find that right combo of treatments, the training, medication, environmental management, we can help the dog bit by bit, and life will get easier. The first step, though, is that the pet parent is at the center of it all. It does need a lot of commitment, a true understanding of the condition, empathy for what their dog is going through, and of course the bandwidth and the resources to help their dog. But if we can get all that in place, we can make things better for the dog bit by bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later on when we're going to talk about how separation anxiety is treated. There are several approaches out there regarding how to address separation anxiety. We're not going to go through all of them, but for those of us who are trained under Marlena Di Martini, our technique of choice is systematic desensitization, and I'll explain more about this later on. I know a lot of people don't quite like the idea of using medication for their dogs. I mean, we are humans, we don't like it for ourselves as well. But very often by the time these dogs come to us, they are already at a very high level of stress. The pet parents are also equally stressed because they might have tried several things. And so we really need to get on board something that will help reduce that stress and anxiety so that the behavioral piece of the treatment plan can kick in tandem with the medication. So we usually prefer to have the pet parent speak to a vet or a veterinary behaviorist if you have one, if you have access to one, as soon as they can. Body language. Most of you here would be familiar with the body language of fear, anxiety, and stress. Very similar body language that you see in dogs with separation anxiety. Some of them would be a lot more conspicuous than others, like vocalizations or house soiling, or they're trying to escape from the door, or destruction. Now, these more conspicuous behaviors tend to alert the pet parent earlier to the problem that their dog needs help. Now, not all SA dogs will show all of these behaviors. Different dogs will show different ones. In understanding separation anxiety, we also need to be aware that there are certain things that we do that will tip off the dog that he's about to be left alone. And these are what we call triggers. And these could start even before you actually leave the home. It could start as early as your alarm clock going off. And then you shower, you brush your teeth, you shower, you get breakfast, you dress, you pick up your things. All that routine that you do day after day that ends with you leaving will be tip-off events that tell the dog, oh no, I'm about to be left alone. You are going to leave me. And then there are the very salient triggers that comes at the point of exit. You opening the front door, closing the door, locking the door, walking away. For those of you in the US who have garage, you will have your garage door opening, the beep of you unlocking the car, starting the car engine, and so on and so forth. So all of these things that happen on a daily basis in a particular sequence will tip off the dog that is about to be left alone. So when we work on the treatment plan for the dog, we do have to weave all these salient triggers into the treatment plan. Here's another video pulled from YouTube. This is just to show you what are some of the behaviors as well as some of the triggers.
Go in your house. Daphne, go in your house.
So that's one tip-off, asking Daphne to go into the crate.
That's it. Okay. Bye-bye. Back in a little while. You're a very good girl. Okay, bye.
Look at the body language. You would recognize that this dog is not comfortable. And you can see by this time, the dog is in a very high level of stress. So what can we do to help dogs like the black dog that we saw earlier and Daphne? Well, those of you who are in daycare, you would know Susan Briggs and Robin Bennett as the dog gurus of doggy daycare. For separation anxiety, I consider Marlena Di Martini as the go-to trainer. She has worked exclusively with just SA dogs for more than 10 years, and that's indicative of her success as well as the market size. There are just so many dogs who need help. So in order to be able to help and educate people about separation anxiety, Marlena has trained a group of us, and to date, there are 76 of us certified separation anxiety trainers, or CSATs. We are scattered worldwide, and as long as you have an internet connection and you're able to put in some video cams in your home, we are able to help you regardless of where you are. Marlena has also created several resources for us to use. Her book, Treating Separation Anxiety in Dogs, And for those guardians who are gung-ho and savvy enough to try a more DIY approach, she has an online program called Mission Possible, where she provides guidelines on how you can take your dogs through a separation anxiety training protocol. And of course, there's the flagship SA certificate program for trainers. As I said before, there are various approaches that have been used to address separation anxiety. Some of them involve the use of food puzzles, food dispensers, or toys to try and create a positive association for being left alone. Others may incorporate a relaxation exercise of some sort together with a safety cue that basically tells the dog that, no, don't worry, I'm coming back. There are, of course, also holistic remedies, wraps, nutraceuticals, pheromone therapy, and so on. We're not going to talk about all of these today because there's just no time for that. But how about the use of food? Because that's the one that we commonly use. Now, this is our dog, Keo, 12-year-old rescue, and he likes his lunch in a Kong. And we give it to him in a Kong regardless of whether we are there or not. So you can see he spends about 4 minutes finishing his lunch. He walks around for a little bit at the balcony area, and within 30 seconds, he's off on his afternoon nap. So in cases like this where the dog isn't that anxious and Keo doesn't have separation anxiety, he would appreciate the food and the mental stimulation from taking his lunch out of Kong. But what about dogs with separation anxiety where they are already so over threshold that they don't even eat? You can leave the best food out and they are not touching it. And there are also other dogs where they will eat, but they still panic after they finish the food. So how can we help these dogs then? And that is why for those of us who are CSATs, we don't pull out food as our first tool of choice from our trainer's toolkit. We instead use this technique of systematic desensitization. And this is how it works. Our premise is if we can keep the dog below its anxiety threshold, so if the dog is below threshold, is less stressed, is less anxious, and therefore you will not see the behaviors of concern, the barking, the howling, the destruction, whatever it is, right? So this means that the dog is the one that sets the pace of learning. If today a dog can only cope with being alone for 1 minute, that's it. We're not going to push beyond that 1 minute just yet. At all other times, if the pet parent has to be away at work, whatever, for longer than a minute, someone has to be with the dog. So over time, we will toggle around that 1 minute threshold until the dog sort of says, well, nothing bad is happening. I can cope with this, and we'll start seeing the behaviors change. The dog becomes relaxed and has become desensitized to that 1 minute absence duration. Now, when the dog has achieved that, we then push it a little bit further, maybe 1 minute, 10 seconds. And then we do the whole thing over again. So you can see from that illustration there, the red line, if we can keep anxiety level low, we can gradually stretch the time alone duration bit by bit. So that is our technique of choice, which has proven to be pretty successful. So some examples of these thresholds. With a black dog, remember the first couple of minutes, it seemed to be quite calm, lying there. Then it sniffed the food toys, and then it started howling about 2.5 minutes later. So for that black dog, the anxiety threshold is below 2.5 minutes. If we were to start work with that dog, we would start below 2.5 minutes. For Daphne, at 5 minutes, she was already trying to chew her way out. So she's already at threshold or even slightly above her anxiety threshold. So if we were to start work with her, there'll be two things that we would do. One would be we would test if she does better out of that crate. And secondly, we would start with absence durations much less than 5 minutes. Now, regardless of what technique you personally are game for, there are certain things that won't help a dog with separation anxiety. And what doesn't help is being thrown into the deep end every time. Can you imagine if you were afraid of water? And just as you are getting comfortable with kind of standing 10 feet away from the edge of the pool, I come along and push you into the pool. So that doesn't help. So it means if your dog is only comfortable with being alone for 1 minute, you cannot work on the exercises, for 1 minute and less, and suddenly decide, oh, wait, I need to just run down one flight of stairs to pick up the newspapers or something. So I'll only be gone like 2 minutes. I'm sure it won't hurt. No, because what will happen is if you're going too fast, it's the equivalent of pushing your dog into the deep end again. It goes over anxiety threshold and the dog will suffer. And that will derail the training program. However, what helps is, as I have suggested, systematic desensitization, where we let the dog set the pace of learning. Because if the dog is set up for success by going at a pace that it's comfortable with, it will cause it less stress, and therefore we have a better chance of resolving that case. Expectations. As with any behavioral challenge, we would, as humans, like a straight line graph, right? 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 20, 30, and we're done. But for separation anxiety, it doesn't happen that way. We may zoom along for a bit, and then we have to take a detour. We may have to plateau for a little bit, or we may crash and burn and have to start again. So in reality, separation anxiety training, just like with all kinds of training, we have to go at the dog's pace. So here's a case study, the story of Princess and Yvonne, who are my SA clients. I think Yvonne is logged in right now. So this is a story which she has kindly allowed me to share. Princess was adopted from a shelter about 4 years ago. She's a hind leg amputee, and she is also noise sensitive and dog reactive. So when Yvonne first contacted me towards the end of 2015, that's about 3 years ago now, it was to work on those behaviors, the behavior modification for noise sensitivity and dog reactivity. And then there was a change of routine. Yvonne changed jobs, so her schedule changed. And one day she found that there was blood on the floor, just on the inside of the front door. And she didn't know what was happening because Princess looked all right. There were no complaints from the neighbors. So she had no idea that Princess was anxious during the time that she was away. So we set up a video camera, and you're going to see what we saw then. And so because of that, we started working on Princess's separation anxiety. And that was when I was still not a CSAT. So this was how Princess was when she was left alone. So this seemed a little bit normal, right? Some dogs will just follow us to the door. Now, Princess was not destructive, which is why Yvonne did not come home to find everything in chaos, and that would have alerted her. So this cycle of going from the front door to the other room, which is the bedroom, and then she comes back to the door, and then this is the behavior of concern for her. This scratching at the door for minutes at a time. And when someone comes back, it's a very low-key return. She's over the top, aroused and excited, right? So the behavior of concern for Princess was the point, because that was what caused the blood stain. She had hurt her nails and her toes, and therefore she bled. So we started work on the training program, and in Princess's case, she does a lot better in a confined area. Earlier on, I was talking about SA dogs who do better outside. But in the case of Princess, she did better when she was in the bedroom. Because if you remember, she's noise sensitive. So if she had free run of the house, she may be reacting to noises out in the corridor or children running about and screaming in the swimming pool downstairs. So in this case, by putting her in her bedroom, which is where she sleeps, she has a buffer against the noise. And this was how she did. So believe me, the video is playing, but this is a very, very welcome sight when we're working with SA dogs. So she does get up and do a little bit of walk around, but it's more like a normal dog. None of that frantic pacing to and fro. Goes back on her bed. Listens for a little bit. Is Yvonne coming back? And then she decides to take a nap. That's her. She has really sharp ears. You can tell when Yvonne is out of the lift, the elevator, and coming down the corridor. And the greeting after the absence is also so much calmer. So initially we zipped along quite quickly, and we did hit quite a big milestone, 35 minutes after just a few months of work. And then, so we kind of thought, well, we are going to crack it, right? But then we hit a speed bump, and that's very normal in whatever form of training, because we zipped along quite quickly. So the temptation is always, can we push a little bit more? But in the case of Princess, we can't, because if we were to push her a little bit too fast, she would start to show that behavior of concern, the pawing at the door. But what we did notice was that her anxiety levels have dropped tremendously. We are no longer getting that whining, the pacing, or the panting, which usually precedes a pawing bout. And even if she were to scratch at the door, it was not that frantic scratching. It was a kind of 1, 2, maybe up to 5 very light taps on the doorway. But still, we don't want that, because remember, that was the behavior that caused injury. So what do we do? How can we get her over this speed bump? Because no matter how we adjusted the steps, every time she would be consistently doing very well for anything below 30 minutes. As soon as we start to approach that, we can see that her anxiety level goes up a notch, though it was not as bad as it was before. And I think that's because we had a piece of the puzzle missing. Remember earlier on, I was talking about behavioral medication, how to get your vet and medication on board sooner than later. And that was what was missing for Princess. In Singapore, unlike those of you who are fortunate enough, we do not have access to veterinary behaviorists. We have many very good vets, but they are not conversant with the prescription of behavioral medication, anti-anxiety medication for treating dogs with separation anxiety. So it was only very recently that one of my CSAT colleagues very, very kindly introduced me to her veterinary behaviorist. And then we managed to connect the VB with Princess's vet, who also happens to be my vet. And we got a conversation going about what kind of medication can we test with Princess. And this is Princess couple of months ago with a combination of fluoxetine and trazodone. For those of us working with separation anxiety, we love watching videos like this where nothing happens. Oh, Yvonne is back. Oh, or rather, not yet. Oh, get off the bed. Get onto the floor near the door so I can hear if Yvonne's back. But I'm still going to snooze. So we start to see Princess behaving more like a normal dog. And that's exactly what we want. But for Princess, it's still a work in progress because we've only just started the medication. So right now we're working on titrating the dosage of trazodone to see what would be the optimal mix for her. So how then do we use systematic desensitization in a training plan? Now, for me, I like to call it a happy alone training plan because our aim is to try and get a dog with separation anxiety to be gradually happier in being alone by themselves. So this is an overview. Every dog would have their own specific set of exercises, roughly 4 to 5 training sessions per week. Each exercise lasts no longer than 30 minutes. And every time we are accessing the dog's anxiety threshold to help us decide how long the pet parent should be away for in that exercise. It's very dynamic. That means how Princess did last night or yesterday would determine the exercise that I would craft for her for today, and how she does today would determine what we'll do tomorrow. So when you are working with a CSAT, you are getting a coach, a personal trainer, and a cheerleader all rolled into one. We are almost in constant communication to look at the exercises and to review and adjust the steps so that we are keeping our client dogs under threshold. And we will be your cheerleader when you go through regressions, because that will happen. There'll be ups and downs, but we will meet them together and push through them. What kind of data do we collect? Well, I'm an ethologist, so I like creating ethograms, which basically is a listing of the behaviors that an individual shows. So in this case, I called it an anxiety ethogram, which is the list of behaviors that Princess shows when she's left alone. And obviously, what we want would be to see more of the behaviors in green, where she's lying down, preferably with her head down. Better still if she's rolled over on one hip or if she's flat on her side. Right? What we don't want to see would be the ones in red, because if we see those, we know she's at threshold or over threshold. So the vocalizations, the whining, the panting, the pawing, we don't want to see those behaviors. This is an example of a data form that we use to collect data for Princess. So remember we spoke about triggers, the events that tip off a dog that you're about to leave. So in blue, these are the triggers that we are working on in this particular exercise. Yvonne picking up her keys, her school bag, opening the door, stepping out, locking the door, putting on her shoes, walking to the elevator, calling for the elevator, the door opening and closing, right? So this exercise is crafted in such a way that at the start, Yvonne would kind of just hang out with Princess in her room for a few minutes. And then in this exercise, there are 5 steps. What I have not put in this example is that in between steps 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, there would be another period of 2 to 3 minutes where Yvonne is just hanging out in the room, reading her emails, reading a book or whatever. This is to allow us to basically reset each step so that it's almost like an actual absence. Right? And so you will see that we toggle between steps which are a little bit more challenging and easy steps. Like the first step, I'm asking Yvonne to pick up her keys, pick up her bag, go out of the door, step out, lock the door, put on her shoes, walk to the lift, call for the lift. The lift comes, ding, the door closes, ding, she goes back home, right? And then the second step, she only picks up her keys and then she goes back into the room and so on. The very last step, that is the one that we are assessing to see whether Princess was coping well with the whole exercise, with the absence duration that we have set for her. In this case, we are looking at 19 to 22 minutes. So you can see this is what the behaviors are. She's lying down with her head down. She looks up, puts her head down, looks up, puts her head down, looks up, did a bit of grooming, puts her head down, rolls over on her hip. A little while later, a little bit more grooming, puts her head down. About 8 minutes later, she did a little walkabout to the door where she stood there. She sniffed. She did a shake off. She did another walk around, which was to go back to the bed, right? And on the bed, she did very well when there were dogs, neighboring dogs barking loudly. Now, in the past, she would have reacted, right? But her anxiety levels, overall anxiety levels, have dropped enough for her to be quite blasé about barking dogs in her condo. She did another little walkabout, about 18 minutes into the absence, and then she went back to her bed and snoozed all the way till Yvonne came back. So when we collect data like that, and sometimes we will have the video to go with the data, we have a blow-by-blow account of how the dog does in each training exercise. And we track everything. So here you can see that for Princess, we are toggling between tiny, tiny, tiny little absences, very short ones, with the occasional bump up to a longer absence. And that's what we do. We don't go in a straight line. We go up and down, up and down. But you do see that the overall trend line is that over time, Princess is getting more comfortable with being left alone a bit longer each time. Now, there are other contributing factors that may affect a dog's progress. Things like, for instance, for Princess, if she's dog reactive, if, say, on a walk, she was unfortunate enough to go around a corner and then there's a dog there, which will throw her over threshold, that may affect how she did in her separation anxiety exercise. Things like time of day, whether a dog has had enough exercise or not, any change in the routine, we track all of that. And Marlena is currently working with a research group to crunch some of this information. So maybe we'll start to see some emerging trends in future. So in working with a dog with separation anxiety, to take a dog from that, where Princess had hurt herself, to this, where she's able to relax for a certain period of time, it does take quite a lot of work. For some dogs, maybe they might go faster. Other dogs would go slower. In the case of Princess, because of that missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle, we went really, really slowly. So if you were to ask me, were we successful? Now, if we were to have set Princess's goal as we need to achieve 8 hours of absence by X time, then we would have set her up to fail. But as we all know in dog training, we want to set the dog up to succeed. And that's what we did by letting her set her pace and celebrating each little success milestone along the way. Remember, she was whining, pacing, panting. All that is gone. So we have achieved those milestones. Even her pawing, even though she may scratch at the door a few times, it was none of that frantic pawing that we saw earlier. So we have alleviated that anxiety a little bit as well. Now, our next stage would then to be to test out the medication and to titrate the dose together in consultation with our vet and to see whether we can take her over that speed bump. So that's the story of Princess and Yvonne, a story which is ongoing. But what are the key elements of that story, which is similar to a lot of separation anxiety dogs' stories? Well, the essential keys are, for us CSATs, we do remote training. We don't go into the home to work with a dog with SA, because once we're in there, we change the natural dynamics of what's going on, and we either get false positives or false negatives, right? So remote training, which is why as long as you have a video camera and internet connection, we can work with you. Behavior medication, the anti-anxiety medication, we would much rather have it on board sooner rather than later. We use the technique of systematic desensitization, where the dog sets the pace so that we are setting it up for success. And this means that since we're letting the dog set the pace, the pet parent has to be prepared to suspend absences and to make that promise to her dog that the dog is never going to be left alone for longer than it can handle. So if it's 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes. If it's 30 minutes, it's 30 minutes. And this takes us full circle back to what we were talking about, this support village that all of us can be part of. Yvonne is a school teacher, and she has to leave promptly at 6:30 every morning to go to school. So she relies on a whole army of pet sitters who must come in punctually. The very first one is crucial. She has to be in there before 6:30 so that she can be with Princess whilst Yvonne can go to school without worrying about Princess. And of course, one pet sitter may not do because they have a life as well. So there is a rotation of pet sitters who will come in, making sure there are no gaps until Yvonne is home. And that's where pet care pros who run daycares, who are pet sitters, dog walkers, or even boarding facilities, you do have a role to play to see if we can come up with creative solutions that will help pet parents like Yvonne. So this is the conversation that I hope that we will start today, and maybe we'll take it offline. I don't know, maybe PAC could facilitate this conversation in some way or another. I have to discuss it with Jess and the rest of the PAC board offline. So the whole premise here, never leave the dog alone. That is the promise that the SA guardian has to make to her dog. So what's the role of daycares, boarding facilities, and pet sitters then? Your primary role is not training. Your primary role is to provide a warm, present human body at all times. And I do mean at all times, because now and then I do hear from my CSAT colleagues that, they run into little blips because they would have found a daycare for their client and instructions were given that the dog was not to be left alone. But somehow, over the course of the stay at the daycare, maybe during feeding time or nap time, the dog was left alone, right? So when we are talking about this, you have to understand the reason for why we are not leaving the dog alone. And that's to keep the dog under the anxiety threshold. Then what about dogs with special needs? Those with dog-dog reactivity or stranger danger? Are we able in a daycare to create safe zones for these dogs? Because sometimes the pet guardians, they would, of course, if they have dogs that have these challenges, they would probably be looking around for a pet sitter. But sometimes gaps do occur where they can't find someone. Maybe a daycare that's able to provide a conducive environment for that dog could be part of that dog's village. And then we have to look at unusual hours. For many SA guardians, they need coverage at odd times, like Yvonne, 6:30, Can daycares come up with creative solutions to cater to these clients outside of their usual operating hours. So yes, we're talking about a very, very personalized service. And bear in mind that the pet guardian is already paying for training, for the vet, maybe a veterinary behaviorist, for the medication, and also for perhaps pet sitters. So if we are to offer this personalized service, can it be affordable enough so that it will work both for the pet parent as well as the daycare or boarding or pet sitter as a business? Okay, I would like us to kind of think about this. We may not come up with a solution, and perhaps it will need you to go away for a bit, brainstorm, and then come back to us. And for those of you who are already PAC certified, you are familiar with our code of ethics and our position statement on humane pet care. Perhaps this is a value-added service that you could provide to your clients with SA dogs. I haven't spoken much about the role of dog walkers because dog walkers do play an important role, but very often it'll be much later in the dog story. Once we have got a dog who is comfortable enough with being left alone for an appreciable amount of time, sometimes they can handle 2 absences. So that means dog is left alone, dog walker comes in, gives the dog a bit of break and enrichment, and then the dog is left alone for a second period until the guardian comes back. It all depends, it all varies from dog to dog in the situation. So I know this is a question that everyone asks. It's a lot of work. Is it worth it? And pet parents like Yvonne have been asked that question over and over again. And I'd like you to read what she has written. For us CSATs, we are unified in our opinion that SA guardians are amongst the best pet parents that we can ever find. They have been through that whole emotional roller coaster. They have been frightened, they have been frustrated, they have been angry, they have been in despair, they have been in tears about what to do with their dog. Should they rehome them? Is euthanasia something they need to look at? How can they cope with suspending absences? These are all very real questions, very real problems. But yet, over and over again, those SA guardians who have taken the plunge, they have dug deep within themselves to find the courage and the strength to commit to the training because they understand what their dog is going through. So for all of us here, if we can be part of that support village, I think you're not just providing a helpline, you're actually providing a lifeline to dogs with separation anxiety and their pet parents, because for every second, every minute that the dog is able to relax at being alone, that dog is getting a better quality of life. So you're actually providing a lifeline that allows these SA dogs to remain with their family and therefore enjoy and continue to build their relationship. Yvonne and Princess spend lots of good times together because other than the separation anxiety, she's like a normal dog. They go for long walks together, they swim on the beach, and Princess, even though she has only 3 legs, she's a star in my fitness program. So what I'd like to leave you with, because this is my last slide, is think about it. Is it something that you as a business owner or someone who works in daycare or boarding or is a pet sitter running your own business, how can you put together a solution that will work for the pet guardian? Because it is a long journey, right? So thank you for your time. That's all I have to say for today. And I hope we can start a conversation going. Thank you.
Okay, great, Nee. Thank you so much. We do have a couple of things. We have a handful of questions. It seems like they're primarily coming in from pet care centers. So please stay tuned if you want that info. Before we get to those questions, I do want to provide the CEU code For those of you that are PAC certified and are hoping to obtain a CEU for your participation today, and the CEU code, and I'll type it into the chat box as well, is C as in cat, 170077. Again, I will put it into the chat box, but I will say it verbally one more time. It is C as in cat, 170077. Okay, and we do have a few questions, again, primarily coming from the pet care center environment. We actually have a team of people at Fieldstone Animal Inn that have been listening and watching your presentation today. And their team is asking, can you speak to the signs that the staff should be looking for in the daycare and lodging environment for dogs that have SA? Specifically, how do you know that it's SA rather than just a little bit of anxiety over being boarded, or just really excited about being boarded and about being around other dogs? How can you tell the difference?
Well, for those of us, we actually do have to do an initial assessment. So what happens would be we would put the dog in whatever was the normal situation that you would leave the dog. In daycare, if you think it's separation anxiety in daycare, then we'll also have to look at the home, because if you suspect SA in daycare, there is probably SA at home. So we would actually assess the dog at home first to see what was happening there. And then we could then look at the dog in daycare.
Okay, great. And the second question from Fieldstone is an overexcited greeting when an owner returns always a sign of SA? And
No.
they are trying to think of it, when the owner comes in to pick up the dog from the pet care center, is that always a sign when the dog gets really excited?
No, it does not. It's one of those things where it's associated with it, but it's not a cause of it.
Okay.
Right? So not all SA dogs would be, all dogs which have overexcited greetings don't all have SA. But
Yeah.
SA dogs may be overly excited at the beginning at greeting their owners until we have managed to bring their anxiety levels down.
Okay. The next question is there a way to prevent a dog from getting separation anxiety? For example, should you start leaving them alone at home when they are younger so they are used to it? Or is it just something genetic that they have or can get?
It depends. Yes, for some dogs where they have never been left alone, and then suddenly one fine day the owner needs to be away for several hours, that can trigger the onset of anxiety. So, yes, we do recommend as part of your family dog manners training that you do practice short absences. But again, you have to assess if that dog is still panicking, and given that you've ruled out all the rest, confinement, distress, that the dog hasn't received appropriate mental and physical stimulation, and so on, provided you've ruled out all those and you're still seeing anxiety behaviors, then we would have to work on that.
Thank you for that. The next question is, what can we do? So this is coming from somebody that owns a larger pet care center. What are some suggestions for that type of environment, how they can handle dogs with SA in a large boarding daycare center?
Well, as I said, if you are looking at systematic desensitization where you are not to leave the dog alone, then you have to figure out in your staff rotation how you can actually have someone be with the dog, whether they take turns or not. So essentially a warm, present body with the dog at all times.
Great. Another question is, how do dogs with sound sensitivity in a daycare center um, I'm having a hard time understanding that question. Let me go to the next one here. What tools can daycare centers use for dogs that have food allergies? What are some other positive reinforcements we can provide the dogs?
Dogs in daycare that have food allergies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do they like to play? Do they like
Mm-hmm.
a game of tug? Do they perhaps like to go for a walk by themselves? You could use some of those. But as I said, some of these do not actually create a positive, may not always create a positive association with being alone. For example, the use of food. Now, we know in classical conditioning that if we want to change a dog's emotional response to something that they are unsure of, that something that they're unsure of must come before the thing that you're trying to associate as being positive. So whether it's food or play or whatever, right? Now, very often we are doing things the other way around. We are giving the food and then you are going away. So now whatever is supposed to be good is now coming before the bad. So you run into a potential problem where your antecedent arrangements are now kind of a little bit wonky. So the dog may, over time, start to predict that, oh, whenever that toy comes out, you're actually going to be leaving me alone. And now that toy or that food, toy or whatever, has become poisoned. It
Mm.
is now another trigger. So now the dog treats it as another trigger that tips it off that is going to be left alone, right? So which is why when we are working with SA dogs, we try not to create that situation.
That's a great point. That's a very good point. Here's an interesting question along those same lines. Would you recommend using interactive cameras and toy or treat dispensers that can be operated via the internet? Do you have any experience with those?
Currently, we don't use those, at least not in the early part of the program, because in the case of like Princess, for example, she won't eat. So you could be lobbing stuff at her and she would still not eat it. And that's quite common with quite a lot of dogs with separation anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Those toys may come in later. Once you've brought the anxiety level down enough, such that the dog is able to snooze, then it becomes a little bit more like what you saw with Keo, where it becomes a little extra something that's there. Right? It doesn't mean that we need to remove all the toys. If the toy was already there, then leave it be. But we do not specifically put out food or food dispensers or treat toys to help a dog with SA, not at the beginning at least.
Got it. This is a question again from a pet care center owner. If you have a dog in your care and you realize anxiety is rising, what can you do in the short term um, until the owner comes back to comfort the dog?
I suppose it depends on what the anxiety is towards. Is it anxiety due to being around other dogs? Or is it anxiety to being left in an area by itself whilst the staff is somewhere else? Because for separation anxiety, basically you're talking about the dog being alone. That means it's not with a human, right? So if you are seeing anxiety where you have to first troubleshoot, is it anxiety levels rising due to stress with interacting in that daycare environment? If so, then it's the usual thing of taking that dog out of that situation, letting it calm down, right? Or are you seeing after you've done that and say you're leaving the dog alone, you're seeing the anxiety level getting worse? Now, if that's the case, then again, we have to troubleshoot. Is it confinement distress that's happening? Right? And if you're talking about comforting the dog until the pet parent comes along, if the dog is comfortable with a particular person, maybe just chill out with that person. And then, of course, you need to have that conversation about what were the exact triggers of the anxiety.
Got it. This is a hot topic here in the U.S., but somebody wants to know, what is your opinion on the use of CBD oil for SA?
Well, I have no experience with that because if you were to bring that into Singapore, you would be nabbed by the police. So I have no experience with that, I'm afraid.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. I didn't know if that was something that was more international or just here in the US. It looks like that is all the questions that we have here today. Um, oh, here's one final question. How do you aid dogs with sound sensitivity in a daycare setting? Because there's not really any completely quiet places.
Yes. So for that, you would have to work with either the SA trainer or another trainer to get some behavior modification done to noise sensitivity first before that dog can be comfortable in that daycare. And again, you're talking about whether that noise level is over threshold for that dog.
Great. Okay, this has been fantastic, Nee. Thank you so much for this great information. Is there any other final words that you want to say before we close the webinar?
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone for taking the time to be here. I know it's kind of all over the place for a lot of people. So I really appreciate you coming on and having a listen to the webinar. I hope it's been useful. And I also hope that perhaps if Jess has all the email addresses, whether at the, in a couple of days or something, if we could send out a feeler to see whether you guys are interested in, say, being part of a directory of daycares that perhaps we could circulate to the other CSATs so that if they're looking for coverage in a certain place, Maryland or Texas or wherever, they can have a look at that list to see if there is a daycare who is willing to work with them to provide the service that's needed. And then, they can then start their own conversation along those lines. So
I
I
think
don't
that
know whether we're able to ask the participants if they're willing to be part of that
I
little project.
I think that we can get in touch with the committee that handles that and start that, because I think this is such an important topic. This is by far our most popular webinar that we've offered, so it's definitely a topic that people are very interested in, and there's a great need for it. So we will get that project in process. Everyone that's on the seminar, thank you for coming. We do appreciate your time. You will receive the link to the recording. I love it that we've had some pet care centers watch this together. I think it's a fantastic one for your teams to watch, whether you would care for these dogs or if you just want to be able to provide just a little bit of advice to people in your lobbies on where to begin. I think it's been a really fantastic topic for today. Nee, thank you so much for putting this together, for everything that you have done for our great organization, PAC. And we hope everyone has a fantastic week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.